Welcome to the Can't Keep Silent podcast. We discuss a variety of topics, and although the basis of our discussions are spiritual, we deal with real issues, some controversial, which at some point may apply to all of us in some way, either personally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, culturally, nationally, and even globally. I am your host, Lydia Clark. As you may know, abortion is an issue about which I am passionate. In fact, I've written a book about my own abortion experience, which bears the same title as this podcast, Can't Keep Silent. Over the past 20 years of speaking up about abortion on television, radio, and at different venues in the U.S., I have addressed many topics related to abortion. Because we are celebrating Black History in this month of February, I felt impressed to share some concerns I have regarding abortion and Black America. What we are doing in the present not only affects our future, but it is also making our history. Joining me on this episode is author and speaker Pete Thomas. Welcome to another edition of Can't Keep Silent. As many of you know, and hopefully all of you know, February is Black History Month. And while I have my friend Pete Thomas here in town, I wanted to do a video with him on this particular topic. And if you want more information about Pete, you can watch another video podcast we did on I Overcame It. Yeah. But right now we just want to address Black history. And my concern is the issue of abortion with Black America and how that's affecting our present and will become part of our history. You know, the statistics show that Black women have abortions at a rate almost 3 times higher than white women. Abortion is affecting our population in a very dramatic way. I believe that it's on purpose. I believe that it's intentional. A lot of people don't believe that, which I really don't understand why, because in so many realms, Black people are, they're targeted. And I believe it's even so in the abortion arena. Black people are targeted. And it started with Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. And I know Planned Parenthood is a sacred cow for a lot of people because they do offer good reproductive care for women. But abortion is not the thing that's going to help us as Black people. Mainly because in any situation, you know that there's power in numbers.
That's good. Amen. That's right.
I mean, that's well known. And to me, it's common sense that, if we're aborting our babies at such a high rate, it's affecting our numbers, our population. And when you have big numbers, you have a bigger voice. You have a bigger say in things. I mean, that's common sense. I know that Black people make up, about 13% of the American population, but I don't know if many of us realize that we are no longer the largest minority in the United States.
And we have not grown. And the primary reason we have not grown statistically is because of our high rates of abortion. It's just not statistically possible to stay at the same rate if you're having normal children. And statistically, when you look into it, you find that it's because of the numbers of abortions that we have in our community. In Detroit, there was an article that came out a few years ago and said Detroit's abortion rate is similar to that of a third world country, because nearly 1/3 of all pregnancies ended in abortion. Another one came out recently that talked about New York City. In New York City, the African American birth rate is lower than the abortion rate. So we're destroying our next generation. We're destroying our future by this. And you mentioned it before about Margaret Sanger. And that's just the fact. That's how. So this is the root. The Planned Parenthood came from this foundation, right? Did. And she said, let me just give one of her quotes from back in the day. And actually, it goes back. Sanger endorsed back in 1927. And to me, the foundation, the root of a thing, is so very important, right?
It's very important
because that sets up everything. And so there was this. And the Supreme Court had this 1927 versus Bell decision, written by Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., the Supreme Court ruled that the compulsory sterilization of the unfit was allowable under the Constitution. And so this decision states that sterilized citizens deemed unfit without the consent and sometimes even the knowledge of those affected, it was okay. And Sanger believed this. She went along with this. And she once wrote that the consequences of breeding, check this out, she's not even looking at people as human beings, right? Yeah. The consequences of breeding from stock lacking human vitality always gives us social problems and perpetuate institutions of crime, of charity and crime. What she means by charity and crime is you got to give them extra money in crime. And so she was a eugenist, you know, and believed in population control, and that if it didn't look like her, if it didn't sound like her, then it was okay to sterilize. And so this is the foundation, the genesis of the entire movement, and it hasn't changed much from there.
And I didn't realize that until I was at a yard sale or something, and I saw this book. I ran across this book, Grand Illusions, The Legacy of Planned Parenthood by George Grant. And as I read it, I was like, wow. You know, and it talks about Margaret Sanger and the eugenist agenda or whatever. And it was just very eye-opening, but you could see that, yeah, this makes sense. It's like the puzzle pieces are coming together, you know, that most of Planned Parenthoods are in inner city neighborhoods. And I had an abortion, and it was at a Planned Parenthood in Michigan. And as I was writing my book about abortion, which I had 20-something years before, I wanted to do some research on the Planned Parenthood that I had the abortion at, because I really wanted to see if they still had my records, because I was doing research.
Yes.
I went to their website, and it was interesting. On their website, and this was in 2003, they had like a link that says why a real minister works for Planned Parenthood. And so this reverend, he's on the board there, and he counsels women before their abortions and things like that. And as I was reading it, this is one thing he said in his statement. It says, "I consider that I am a prophetic and social action ministry." And this is the sentence here that just threw me off. He said, "Planned Parenthood meets the reproductive health care needs of women who are racially, educationally, and socioeconomically disadvantaged." I was like, how can you be racially disadvantaged?
That's true. Well, that's true, because your race is less than any other.
Yeah, because of your race, you're at a disadvantage. Racially disadvantaged. I could understand socioeconomically, but he singles out a race, you know, and that bothered me. And so when I emailed them, because that's the kind of person I am, I'm like, what does this mean, racially disadvantaged? And they never responded. But when I went back to the website, they had taken that out.
That makes sense.
Because they couldn't explain it in a way that was right. That let me know that they knew that was shaky. That was shady, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I would think they would have said, well, what we mean is that if you have a certain color, that people treat you differently. But those things are covered in the other things you mentioned, the economic and all of that.
That's right.
They're
you know, it's
That's
just all people, all people socioeconomically. You know, why do we have to be racially disadvantaged? And I was like, wow. So it's just things like that.
That's right. And it speaks to the fact that, you know, there have been statistics that show that Planned Parenthood, they target minority communities.
Yeah.
Now, and one of the things, I'm the type, you know, I like to get information from multiple sources, right? So when you read Planned Parenthood, they say that they don't target minority communities, they target a majority urban areas that need the resources, but when you break it down, they are targeting, they place their facilities in these areas, you know? And so, and there's a group, and that's what we're getting at, there's a group that's primarily disaffected, disadvantaged, negatively affected by this group and by this way of thinking that it's okay to abort your children, and that's the African American community. We are affected negatively by this at a far greater rate than anyone else.
Any other. And so, you know, we're not here to dog Planned Parenthood out, but we just want to help Black people understand. This is my thing, that it's important that we have our children to give us a voice to give us an impact.
That's right.
And if I can, these scriptures came to me because I believe there are parallels in the Bible between us and the children of Israel, right? Okay, so give me a moment.
Well, while you're pulling that up, let me speak on this. I'm thinking here, I'm sitting here talking about abortion, and someone may say, well, how can a man speak on abortion, right? Because there's this entire thought process about it's a woman's body and all that. But I have had at least 2 children that I know of aborted. I've had one person who told me they aborted my child, and another person wouldn't answer the question, would never answer the question. So I'm pretty sure I have had at least 2 children to abort my child. And I'm sitting here now, I don't have any children at all, and would love to have children. Not saying that I'm not going to have children in the future, but it affects not just the woman, it affects the entire community. It affects the entire community. You had some scriptures.
Yeah. So in Exodus chapter 1, we are coming up on the children of Israel who are living in Egypt. They had their own land in Canaan, and Joseph, who was Jacob's son, who was Isaac's son, who was Abraham's son, okay? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph was Jacob's son, and he had 11 brothers, and his brothers were jealous of him. And so what did they do? They sold him into slavery.
Yes.
Okay? It was just one person, but it would affect an entire nation that this one person was sold into slavery. And so he went to Egypt, and because God blessed him with so much wisdom, he became right up under Pharaoh. He was the second in command of Egypt, right under Pharaoh. But he was still a slave. He was still an ex-con because he had been put in prison. Okay? He was an ex-convict. And so then when that Pharaoh died and Joseph died and all that generation died, this is where we come to in Exodus chapter 1. And it says, eventually a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Why is that? Because they were in a foreign land, and even though they weren't like technically in slavery at that time, they were still, under bondage because of Joseph. Okay, it says, and then they will escape from the country. So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves, and they appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build their cities and so on. It says, but the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. So this group of Egyptians feared their numbers.
That's good.
Because in their numbers they were stronger, and that's the point. So they oppressed them. They oppressed them. Okay, it's like I see a parallel. I see a parallel here. That was Margaret Sanger's agenda.
That's good.
She wanted to keep the numbers low.
That's right.
Population control of a certain groups of people, and I think that is still systemically happening today. It's not as overt as what happened here, but it's happening in different ways.
Absolutely. A couple things quickly come to mind. Number one, what you were reading, they said they will escape from the country.
That's right.
And the real key there is the only reason escape is powerful and is important is because they will be able to leave and take care of themselves, right? That's one principle. They will be able to leave and take care of themselves. Also, you have to understand, if they left, the labor force of the land would leave as well. And so they were completely self-serving. And the Egyptians, this was all about how do we protect our country, our nation, our people. And the other thing that comes to mind is multiplication is a blessing from God.
It is.
It's a blessing from God. But when you strategically, in my mind, when you strategically allow the enemy to target your numbers, right, then you block and you buffet that blessing, right? You can't demand certain things because of your numbers.
That's right.
Because you don't have them. Because unfortunately, when it comes to abortion, you're literally you're eliminating one of the blessings of God.
Yeah. And one thing I want to point out about this too is that the conditions that they were living in were harsh.
Yes, that's good.
And this is a big reason why, for instance, Planned Parenthood is in inner cities, because they know people in inner cities are struggling,
Yes,
that they don't have
yes.
resources and whatever, but they're bringing birth control. Their answer is you need to control your population through birth control,
That's good.
through abortion, because you can't have any more kids. But I just want to say they were slaves. And they were under harsh conditions because as they multiplied, the fear of the Egyptians made them oppress them even more. But
right.
that did not stop. It said, in fact, they increased
More and more.
in the harsh conditions because I believe they understood that we have to grow as a people. We have to grow our population. And I want to read this one in Jeremiah chapter 29. At this point, Israel is going into Babylonian captivity. They were exiles in Babylon. And this is Jeremiah was a prophet, and he had a word from God for Israel. And he said, "This is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says to all the captives he has exiled to Babylon from Jerusalem. He said, build homes and plan to stay. Plant gardens and eat the food they produce. Marry and have children. Then find spouses for them so that you may have many grandchildren. Multiply, do not dwindle away."
Wow.
So even though they were in exile in Babylon, God says specifically, multiply, because he knew they wouldn't be in bondage always. Because down, if you read further down, there was an appointed time for them to be in that. And then he was going to restore everything and set them free, because that's how God is. So God doesn't want black people, us, to suffer forever.
That's good.
You know, there's a day of deliverance coming, and when it comes, we need to have the numbers to have a voice.
That's good.
So there are many facets to abortion and stuff that we could talk about, but I just wanted to focus on this one because, you know, we're in Black History Month. And, you know, I understand that a large number of black women abort because of the conditions, you know, that people are not helping them with, the government is not helping with. But let me say this, if you don't get help from anywhere, we really have to help ourselves. We have enough people who have come out of look at Pete, okay? We didn't do this interview with him, but he came from like the hood of Detroit. You want to talk about that?
Well, one of the things I said, I wanted to throw this out to you and say that some children deserve to be aborted.
What?
I knew you were going to say that. Because if we look at what Planned Parenthood has done, right? Where they're targeting. So if you grow up in an urban area, you should be aborted. If you grow up in poverty, you should be aborted. That's me, right? My mother struggled with mental illness. You know, and so we were transient. We lived in about 13 different cities by the time I was 13 years old. And the fact that I was going to be on this route, on this road, bouncing all around, living homeless and all of that, was set before I was born, because she had this mental illness before I was born, right? Apparently there was an issue between her and my father, so she was gone off by herself. She was going to be a single mom from the second I hit the planet. I deserve to be aborted. Right? Oprah Winfrey, if you read about her story, this is another example. She deserved to be aborted. And I'm saying that, you know, obviously facetiously, because if we really look at the people and where they've come from, you know, it's just ridiculous to think that somebody can't make it. Right? And you mentioned the east side of Detroit. Grew up on the east side of Detroit. Crime everywhere. I was running it down. The first time I was ever robbed, I was in the 8th grade. Right? Like, who robs in 8th grade? You know, first time I was ever had a gun pointed at me was in the 10th grade. And so the environment that I was born into was not one that would lead to that would point to any kind of success. But we had kids to come out of that environment, to go to high school and to go on to college. And we can't look at the environment and say, because you're in that environment, you should not be given a chance. Because what I started thinking about was, you know, the children of Israel, they're in slavery, they're in bondage, but they had a respect for children. So much so that Moses, they were like, we can't kill off these kids. Let's give, you know, Moses was put into the little thing that hit the river, you know what I mean? To give the child a chance. So even in those days, which are way harder, they were way more difficult to live in than today.
Way more.
way more difficult. The children of Israel had this respect for human life, for the next generation that we seem to have lost. A legacy, that's right. That's one of the things I wrote down. A legacy that we seem to have lost. And so we think because, as you mentioned, that there's no government program for this, that we can't make it. But that's even recent. We used to take care of ourselves. You know what I mean? We took care of our own selves and our own children.
And it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy.
Easy. Come on now.
But as Pete said, you have to see your children as worth it. And that's a whole different, thing that I'll talk about later. But it's real. Okay, women are struggling.
Yes.
Okay, and so no, we are not just pro-birth, we are pro-life.
Come on now.
Okay, we really are. But this is one thing I just want to throw in. My children went to a school system in Michigan. And that school system clearly was not designed for black males. And as a parent, I would go to these meetings and they'd give their annual reports and they would have the results of testings, and black males always scored the lowest. Always. There was just this huge, what is it called? There's a word for it. It's
disparity?
It's a disparity. But in that school system, it's a term I heard a lot. It's a gap. It's some kind of achievement gap. Okay, it's an achievement gap between black males and everyone else in the school system. And it was a struggle. But I had sons in the system, in that, especially my oldest son. It was horrible as a black parent. It was horrible to see how he was treated and how things were just set against him. But I want to say this. They knew there was an achievement gap. They came up with programs.
Oh, that's good.
To help black parents help their children.
Wow, the parents help their children. That's good.
Yeah, but at that time, you didn't have access to a lot of resources or understanding of some things. So they would hold these once a month, I think, for black parents. They would have these like meetings where they would just give you all kind of information to try to help your children succeed. Okay, and I would go, and it would be on a Saturday because they knew people worked or whatever. They would, if you didn't have transportation, they would pick you up. That's awesome. They had daycare there if you had small children. So what they were trying to do was take away every excuse you would have for not coming. I mean, they just made it, they fed us, all kind of things. And it would be like 5 of us.
Oh, my Lord.
It would be like 5 of us there. And I would cry. I was just like, God, I don't understand, because the achievement gap is real. In fact, when I would sit in the auditorium looking at these reports of this achievement gap between black males and every other student in the school, I would literally sit there and cry. It just hurt my heart. And then when they're trying to do something to help parents help their children succeed, the parents did not show up. And they literally took away every reason you would have not to come. They just did not come. And that's why I'm saying we have to help ourselves. We have to, want to try to help our children. We have to see them as valuable, as an investment. And my brother, one time, he gave me a book. It was called, I think it was called The Color of Water. And it was interesting. It was a black man, and he married a white woman, and they had, I don't know, like 13 children. And then he died. He was like the breadwinner of the family. Then he died. So here is this woman, and she has all these black children, and they struggled. But her mindset, these people are going to succeed.
Well, come on. Expectation.
And by the time the book ended, it listed all of her 13 children, and they were doctors. I mean, they came out of abject poverty. So what I'm saying is there is hope. I don't want us to buy into generational poverty.
No, that's right.
We can break that. We can do it, but you have to see your children as valuable. You have to put in them. This does not have to be your life. We don't have to perpetuate it. We can turn the tide. And even now there are more resources.
That's right.
And, we have the internet to help us find those. But I just want to say the point of it is, there is hope. There is hope. And I want you to see that we need our people.
We need them.
We need our next generation. we need them to come up and do better. And it may be a struggle for us in the beginning. You know, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's worth it.
100%.
You know, it's not just what's going on in our lives right now, but we have to look down into generations.
That's
You
right.
know, how is this going to affect our people down the road? Abortion is not the answer. It's not the answer. It's not the answer for us.
I haven't had any children, but the childbearing in particular is not easy. You know, it's not easy, but there's a blessing on the other side.
It's worth it.
It's worth it.
It's worth it. But you know, even if you're struggling, and I'm not going to get all into this now. I'll do this on a later video. But it's really how you view your children.
Ooh, that's good. That's good.
You know, if you see them as a problem, they will be a problem. If you see them as a burden, they will be a burden. But if you see them as a blessing and as an investment that you will reap rewards from later, you know, depending on, you reap what you sow, you know, and so if you sow into them good, you're going to reap good out of them. And so we just want to, you know, encourage, especially, you know, our people. Your children are a blessing. They may be your way out of hardship and out of poverty. Not that you're supposed to put unrealistic expectations on them, but you just never know what God wants to do with that child. We need our people. We need to have a voice. We need to be able to make an impact so that we can see things change for us and be in a position not just to shout for them and yell for them, but to be the people who actually make the changes.
That's good.
You know, for our own communities. So that's all I wanted to share in this video. Let's make our Black history, right now, the history that we're making, positive for our people.
Amen. Amen. And I just, the last thing, you just have no idea what the child that you can birth will do, not just for your family, but for society, for community. And we've had so many children who were born in the midst of slavery or poverty in our own country that went on to do just amazing things. You know, one of the things that came to my eye was just looking through a couple things, and we can wrap up. George Washington Carver, we may know the name, but he was born into slavery, so didn't have a typically a good life at all starting off. But God used him. There was a time in the South where this little critter called the boll weevil was devastating the South, right? This is in the 1900s, and literally what George Washington Carver did, he went into a lab, and we really couldn't call it a lab. It was at Tuskegee Institute. They didn't have any money, so we went into a room, right, with a Bible and a peanut, and he said, "Lord, give me wisdom on what this peanut can do." And the Lord gave him all these different things, from fuel to oils to peanut butter, all of these different things that could come out of a peanut. And then he was able to go all over the South and literally revitalize the South, to keep the South from being devastated economically by replacing the cotton crops at the time with peanuts. I mean, I have a picture on my computer of the president, I believe it was FDR, coming to shake his hands. Right? So this is just an example where God can bless you from anywhere. And all of this came out of this guy's mind. He didn't have like special equipment, and he just gave it all away. He didn't put patents on it and all that, but it literally saved the South. So what do we mean when we say the South? The black families who had come out of slavery, right? They had an economic way to continue to move forward, right? Because once you come out of slavery, the cotton crops are still there, and they had sharecropping and all of these different things, and it was still a hard life. It was hard, but imagine if all the cotton crops were gone and you have no life, right? And so he was able to get this idea from God that revitalized that, and was born not knowing his father, born into slavery. And so we have to look at our children as a legacy, as multiplication, as a blessing from God.
Yeah, it is, because you have no idea what God has for that child.
That's right.
And what that child will do. But you, as a parent, have to see them
Amen.
like
That's
that.
good stuff.
And let them know that they are a blessing. And let them know that there's a purpose for their lives.
Yes.
And this is part of, you know, Treasure Quest, the nonprofit that I started. That's what we want to do. We want to help people discover their purpose, the plan God has for them, because he has something for everyone. I don't care where you were born,
That's good.
who you were born to, whether your parents planned you or not. God planned you.
That's right.
God planned you, and he has a purpose for your life. And he has the same purpose and plan for your children. Black lives do matter,
Amen.
whether they're on this side of the womb or that side of the
That's
womb.
right. Amen.
You know, and if we all just work together, we can make the lives of our children great.
Amen.
Okay?
Amen.
All right. Thank you.